Well, hi everyone. Thanks everyone so much for being here. I think that the turnout always is a reflection of where people's consciousness is at, not just in the vicinity of our office, but in the United States as a whole. And we know that now we're in a period of a new upsurge in the United States, a new movement in the United States, one that hasn't happened in decades, really. Because this movement, the Occupy movement, is not a movement on a single issue, right? It's not for immigrant rights, it's not against the budget cuts, it's not for students' rights or workers' rights, but it's a movement against the system as a whole, right? And this new slogan that has come out, this "We are the 99%, has signified, a real qualitative shift in the consciousness of working people and students and veterans and members of the military throughout the whole entire United States. And so the last time there was this real movement directed against the system itself was in the 30s, when these movements were led by communists, by radical anarchists, and led a determined fight back against the system itself, and really came on the precipice of winning. And it's a history that many people in the United States don't know. Of course, they want to keep it a secret from us. But there was nearly a socialist revolution in the United States during the Great Depression, right? An economic crisis that we haven't seen the likes of until now. And the only reason that was staved off is because so many millions of people, unemployed, veterans, workers, so many of them took political action. So many millions took to the streets and shut down their workplaces, shut down the streets, occupied buildings, carried out occupations just like are happening today. Veterans occupying space right outside the White House, demanding the rights for veterans. I mean, it is because so many people took such militant political action that all of the things that we're told are gifts from the Democratic Party, like Social Security and unemployment insurance, all of these things were won through that battle. And that the only reason the politicians gave up anything during that depression is because they were scared of being overthrown and dragged out into the streets from people breaking down the doors to the White House. And I think that the movement that's growing here in the United States today, while it's not at that stage yet, has that potential to grow into that kind of movement. Not one that has the ability to win on a particular issue, but one that has the ability to have the ultimate victory of overthrowing the rule of the 1%, of completely reorganizing society on the basis of meeting human needs instead of on the basis of making super profits for this tiny clique of billionaires who sit at the top. So I'm going to, as it was mentioned, I'm one of those who was arrested defending the Occupy LA encampment. I was lucky enough to get out of jail after about 22 hours. I was there with my comrade Doug, as some may know as well. But I was one of the first people released from jail. The only reason that I was released is because we were the only two in a communist party who immediately had lawyers and people with bail money and in a high level of organization immediately working to get us out as soon as we were in. One of the advantages of being in a highly organized group. So we were quickly released, but many are still there today. Most were released today, but many spent many, many days in jail. And so I'm going to go through the entire process to give all of you an eyewitness account of what happened, and then I'm sure there'll be lots of questions and things afterwards. So we had been involved, the PSL, the Answer Coalition, in the early planning stages of Occupy LA, prior to October, in the weeks leading up to October 1st, part of the planning meetings, the general assemblies that were taking place to make this thing happen. And on October 1st, it was a really powerful march of thousands of people who marched from Pershing Square through downtown Los Angeles and then began setting up the encampment at City Hall. And it was a really amazing sight. I mean, it was about 5,000 people who came out, all united under the slogan that we are the 99%, implying that we have a common enemy, which is that richest 1%. And it was a really amazing thing. And every city around the United States dealt with the Occupy movement in their own way. And prior to our occupation taking place, there was already a precedent of police brutality, of state repression, and of the politicians and the police trying to make it go away. But from the get-go, LA and the mayor and the city and the police took a very different approach than other cities. And they had a very hands-off approach. The city council passed a resolution saying that they support the occupation and they have the right to be there. The mayor said that the people have the right to be there. The mayor would go out and give out ponchos to people when it was raining. The city council would come and have lunch with the occupiers. And the police presence was very restrained. There was hardly any cops there in uniform. You can be assured there was many, many, many undercover cops there for the entire time. But this is the approach they took. And they wanted to say that, we're a friend of the occupation, we're not going to hurt you, we're on your side. And of course, I think this was obviously just another tactic which had the same end goal. And LA has arrived at the same end goal as most of the other occupations, which was a violent crackdown. And so over the past, Occupy LA lasted 61 days total before it was quite literally torn apart. And the last week or so before the occupation was raided, or the 2 weeks prior, the city's rhetoric just kind of shifted completely. They started making up excuses like, the grass on the lawn is getting hurt, like the trees might die, and things like that. Of course, the protesters' demands and the reason that we were taking part in the occupation is because people are dying who are getting cut off of HIV and AIDS treatment with the budget cuts. People are dying in hospitals because medical care is being cut. Students are being completely cut off from a college education. Workers who worked 20 years in a job and worked hard their entire lives just suddenly got laid off and their entire lives destroyed because entire families are being kicked out of their homes and thrown out in the streets and made to live out of their cars with their children. I mean, these are the issues why people are there. And then all of a sudden, the grass and the trees became, the real critical issue for the people of Los Angeles. We had to save the park there. So the eviction notice came, and the mayor said, your time is up. And it was interesting for the mayor to tell us that we had to leave because City Hall, that's public space, right? That belongs to the people of Los Angeles. That's ours. It belongs to the people who work here, who live here. And public space like that, especially public space where there is a government building, where there are the institutions of the city. I mean, that public space exists so we can exercise our constitutional rights. I mean, that space is there precisely so we can protest, so we can air our grievances, so we can make our voices heard. That's why it exists. And so when the eviction came, when they said, no, your voices are done being heard, you have to be quiet now, you have to go home quietly now and go back in your homes and stop protesting, that's kind of a ridiculous demand to get from the mayor. And so when we knew that the eviction was coming, the notice was given that by midnight on Sunday night, everyone there was there illegally. And that everyone there past midnight on Sunday was subject to arrest. Now, of course, the city would very much have liked people to say, well, I don't want to get arrested. I don't want to get shot in the head with a tear gas canister like in Oakland. I don't want to get tased and pepper sprayed like at UC Davis or at Occupy Wall Street. And so the city was hoping that people would break down the camp and people would go home as soon as that risk of arrest happened. Well, actually the opposite happened. And we put out a call, others put out a call to have everyone possible go to Occupy LA on Sunday night, stay there after the eviction notice came into effect, and stay there to defend the camp. Because it's not about, defending the camp itself, right? But it's about defending the Occupy movement. Because it's not just about getting people off of the grass to save the grass, obviously that's not true, but it's about an attempt to crush this movement as a whole. And so mobilizing to defend the occupation is defending this entire movement across the United States that's saying that the 99% have nothing in common with the 1%, and that we should be the ones that are in charge and that control the wealth of society and the products of our labor. And so thousands of people came out. About 3,000 people came out to that action, right? Most of those people, the vast majority, were not people actually occupying. We're not people who are sleeping at the park. But were residents of Los Angeles, people who work in Los Angeles, people who live and work around Los Angeles, who support this movement and understand that it's worth defending. And so at midnight on Sunday, there were 3,000 people in that park that knew that just by being there, they could be shot, they could be arrested, they could be taken to jail. But that didn't deter any of those 3,000 people. They all showed up and they were ready to defend that occupation. And it was a really amazing thing. And I think the police that night were quite prepared to raid the occupation. We know that they had over 1,000 riot police lined up just a few blocks away, that they had actually blocked off all of the streets around City Hall, really the same steps they went through the night of the actual raid. But what happened was there were so many people there, and it was such a spirited militant demonstration that it's very likely that the police weighed their options at that point and said, well, maybe this is not a good night to raid the camp. They marched all the way to the sidewalk at the lawn of City Hall. We went in the thousands to greet them, and then all that happened that night was a standoff from about 1 in the morning till 6 in the morning with the riot police just on the edge of the park, with thousands of us preventing them from getting in. And so that first night we were successful in staving off a raid. The next night, on Monday, we stayed there again throughout the entire night, many of us here, preparing for that raid. 3,000 didn't come out again. Of course, it's a hard thing to get people to come out day after day. But many of us went and stayed there the entire night, preparing for that raid to come. And then on Tuesday, we got word very quickly that it looked like the LAPD was mobilizing for a raid. We know that they had buses prepared. They had set up a facility at Dodger Stadium to facilitate arresting a large number of people. And so we saw these signs that made it seem clear that a raid was soon. And so we immediately put out a call through every outlet that we could for every single person to get down to the occupation, because the raid was happening at 10 p.m. We got word from an inside source, and so we knew that it was imminent. And so people flooded to City Hall. I think likely we would have had the same numbers as we did on Sunday, but if you were trying to get there past 8:30 p.m. and really the word just got out around 7 or 8, it was impossible to get to City Hall because the police took all of these measures to make it impossible for people to get there. If you tried to take the train during a busy metro time, you'd find that there was only one car running on the red line. I don't think that was a mistake. Obviously, they're trying to slow people's traffic getting there. And the police had blocked off before 10 p.m., before the eviction notice came into effect, had blocked off streets all around City Hall. And there's people here who can attest to this, that pedestrians trying to walk down the street in the direction of City Hall were turned away and told that they were not allowed in the area. But regardless, about 1,000 people were able to make it to the City Hall lawn for when the arrests were coming. At about midnight is when things started happening, right? I mean, at 10 p.m. on the dot, actually, the LAPD helicopter hovered above, shining the spotlight on people, letting us know that we were there. But it wasn't until about midnight or 11:30 that the raid started. And the way the raid started was the police actually had snuck into City Hall. We had actually anticipated, or not we, but the people at the camp had anticipated the police coming from the streets. And so we built barricades all around the camp, on all of the sidewalks and things like that. There was just huge trash cans and things piled up so the police couldn't come in easily. But they were tricky, and they came through the steps of City Hall. And the way they raided the camp was they had hundreds of officers flood out of City Hall. There's a huge tent at the top of the steps. They ripped through the tent, and they busted into the camp and formed a perimeter around all of the sidewalk space, so surrounding all of the tents, and then surrounding all of us who were in that middle section, where that big mural was at the bottom of the stairs. But, there's only been one narrative that's been out right now. That's the narrative of the mayor, the narrative of the city, that's really just self-congratulatory, patting themselves on the back, saying the LAPD is reformed, they were so great, they were so peaceful. But that was not the scene when the police initially rushed the camp. When the police came into the camp, they ran to their positions, forming this perimeter. Anyone in their way, when they were running out, got hit with batons. If you fell down, you were hit with batons on the ground. I was in jail with a man who was a photographer, who was there as a journalist, who was on the steps of City Hall, looking down the steps, taking photos of people in the encampment. And when the police charged out, they charged out unannounced before any dispersal order was given. This man taking pictures was thrown down the stairs, thrown down several stairs. Once he was on the ground, the police began beating him with batons. He had a huge bleeding welt on his head. This was a journalist. And when they arrested him, they charged him with assaulting an officer. So this person may actually be dealing with some severe legal repercussions for what's happened after being beaten and arrested for just trying to take some photos. But that wasn't all. I mean, in addition to people that we saw beaten, journalists included, people wearing press credentials, there was two people or more maybe, who were in a tree. And then the police thought that the best way to convince these people to get out of the tree was to begin shooting them with beanbag guns and with rubber bullets. One of the people who was in the tree, very high up in the tree, was struck with a beanbag gun. He was hit, and he fell. And he fell about halfway before he was able to catch himself on a branch. It was a very close call. But if he would have fallen that entire distance, he could have died or become, very likely, he would have been seriously injured. And this was within the first, 10 minutes of the raid. The LAPD thought it was a very high priority to just begin opening up on the people that were up in the trees. And so that was the scene. It was an extremely violent scene. The police were restraining themselves as much as possible, obviously because of the reputation they have, right? There's a lot of talk at the occupation about how, the cops are on our side now, the city's being so friendly, the cops are being so nice. Well, there's a reason they took that approach, is because we're talking about the LAPD. This is like the most notorious police department in the entire country. They have a very long, notorious, and bloody and brutal history. And so that was the face they had when they came through the camp, although they tried their best to be restrained. And what happened there is all the cops came and surrounded the perimeter and then began busting through the tents, ripping up tents, breaking them down. People were sleeping inside their tents, people who actually didn't really realize an eviction was going to happen. Surprisingly, there were those people who were shook from their sleep and dragged out of their tents. So they began destroying all of the tents in the camp. And so all of us who had stayed, who didn't run away when the cops came, all became packed in the middle at the bottom of City Hall stairs while we watched the cops go through the camp, rip up all the tents, and confiscate everything that was in the tents. And so we were watching the occupation just be demolished. Every single tent just razed to the ground. And so what we did is we had one final tent, the last standing tent of Occupy LA, right there in the center of the plaza, and all of us formed a circle and linked arms around that tent, defending the final structure of the occupation. And there's about 100 or more of us, myself and Doug included, that entered into that little circle. Then, at that point, of course, we were completely surrounded by hundreds of riot police. Everyone who had left the park was pushed out onto the street, where they continued a militant demonstration of hundreds of people confronting the police line. And actually, the video from it, hopefully at the next meeting we can have some ready. But many of the people in this room on that police line, facing off against the police and standing up for those of us who had chosen to stay inside. And it was a long battle for many, many hours on the streets with the police there. But inside the park, we were completely surrounded, and then one by one, the police started arresting people who were sitting in the circle. Once we were arrested, and in total, 292 people were arrested, which is quite a high number. These are all people who not only were defending the camp, like the hundreds and hundreds of people who came out, but wanted to commit the ultimate defense of the camp and said that they weren't leaving for anything. 292 people is a very admirable number. It's a very high degree of people who got arrested on the spot in defense of that camp. Now, the arrest itself, or the incidents of police brutality that happened during the raid, we're just scratching the surface of really the abuses and the assaults on civil liberties that we'd be subjected to. This is my first arrest. I've been in 3 other incidents where we were arrested, either for an intentional civil disobedience or when our constitutional rights were being taken away. And this time was far, far different than any of those other experiences. It was far, far worse. The treatment we got was far, far worse. We were kept in very tight handcuffs, some handcuffs so tight they were passing out, behind our backs for about 8 hours. And this is unusual. I mean, usually you are not cuffed for this long. We were kept in a bay on a cold cement floor for the duration of these 8 hours until we were booked. And then when we were booked is when, the real evidence came that the city was going to, the aggression that they wanted to take out during the raid but couldn't because they had to be restrained. And so they took out their aggression in the jail when we found that we had $5,000 bail each. Now, if anyone is familiar with California law, if you are charged with a misdemeanor, a minor offense, California law says misdemeanor offenders shall be released at their own recognizance, meaning no bail. And this is a California law. And $5,000 bail is a high bail. I mean, that's not even, it's not like it was $1,000 bail. I mean, this was a bail that people get for committing much more serious offenses. And so we found out that we had this $5,000 bail, and I thought it was curious because, immediately once we got processed, they put us in cells, 2-person cells in the main jail. And that's when I realized that something was different about this arrest, because I've never been put in a 2-person cell like that. I mean, in these types of things, you're processed, you go through all the things, and then once you're done, it's a long process, but you're released at the end of it. And they had no intention of releasing us, and they put us in these cells because they had intended that people were going to be there until Monday or Tuesday. Now, why did they do this? They did this because, why did they treat us so badly during the arrest? Keeping us handcuffed for so long, denying people medical attention. I mean, Doug and I, at one point, a group of us said we have to use the restroom because it had been, 6 hours or so. So they go, okay, everyone come in a group who has to use the restroom. We all go up, still handcuffed, and then the cop comes up and says, okay, can you go to the bathroom with your handcuffs on? And then, you can't, and I'll show you, but you can't access the front of your body. And so the cop just said, well, if you can't do it with the handcuffs on, you can't do it. People urinated themselves in jail because they weren't allowed to use a bathroom. And so the reason that we were treated poorly during the arrest, the reason that a ridiculous bail was given in violation of California law, and not only that, but you are supposed to be arraigned if you are arrested as soon as possible. But the day after the arrests, on Wednesday, the city refused to arraign anybody. There is no arraignments. On Thursday, they said they would only arraign 50 people out of the 292 arrested. And they made it very clear that it was their intention to keep people in jail through the weekend, till Monday or Tuesday, right? That's a lot of days in jail in a tiny 2-person cell, with absolutely nothing to see or do. It's quite boring. The reason that they did this, and the reason that they violated California law, were so harsh on these people, is because this was punishment. They were punishing us before we had been convicted of any crime. But it's much further than that. I mean, the reason they did this is because they were trying to intimidate and scare all of those people who took that heroic stand. They're trying to scare them from ever again coming back out into the streets in protest, trying to scare them from ever again taking part in an occupation or voicing their opinion against what the government and the city government is telling them to do. And you know, the majority of people who are arrested, I can tell you, the majority of them, the Occupy movement was the first political step they ever took. The first time they ever entered into political motion. It was just it was hundreds of just brand new, mostly young people who are taking that next step and saying that I'm tired of being angry all the time, I want to fight. And so knowing that it's all these new and young people who are taking this heroic action, the city wanted to send a message to them and say, this is what happens when you try to stand up for your rights. You go to jail, you get harassed, you get beaten, you spend days on end in prison, and that was the message that they were trying to send to those protesters. So there was a litany of civil liberties abuses other than the ones I just mentioned. First of all, the camp should not have been raided in the first place. It was an illegal raid. Despite the fact that it was our constitutional right to be there, it was a public space, we were exercising our constitutional rights, that made it illegal for them to raid it. But even when they announced the raid, we took even a further legal step to say it's illegal for you to raid it, but to make sure that you're not going to, there was a temporary restraining order filed with the city. And that temporary restraining order said that the police could not raid the camp. And that temporary restraining order was valid with the city until it was seen by a judge, until a judge either threw it out or honored it. But the raid happened the night before it went to court, before the judge had the option of throwing it out, like he probably would have. But it happened preemptively. And so on that basis, it was illegal as well, because there was a restraining order. And then there was the violation of freedom of press. Now, many have maybe seen this story, and you were told this is the land of the free, and these are the great civil liberties that we have: freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of press, freedom of religious association. And so it's hard to believe that what I'm about to say is something that happened in the country that supposedly has those things. But the LAPD said plainly that we are going to allow in one TV reporter, one newspaper reporter, one radio reporter. And we are going to choose who that reporter is. And all other journalists, it is illegal for you to be here. Now, how does that make sense? That the police can just say that journalists who have credentials with the State Department, who are allowed by law, mandated by law, to be able to report on anything that is happening, were told that they were not allowed to enter the park. And who do you think the media outlets were that the LAPD chose? Obviously media outlets that they knew were going to do the stories like they did. The stories that were saying the LAPD was so peaceful, they were so great and honorable and good and just and all of this stuff. So that was the reports that they wanted to go out. And so there was this stifling of freedom of press, where all of the journalists who went too were subject to being beaten, were subject to being arrested. And that was a violation of one of our most fundamental rights, the freedom of the press. Now, and there was another one too. When our attorney came to the jail to visit us, they showed up in the morning, our attorney along with others, and when they got there, the person at the front desk said, "Oh, well, the jail's closed right now. You can't see your client." That is illegal. You have to allow an attorney to see their clients, and jails don't close. I mean, everyone doesn't go home for the night. People are there all the time. So they were told that the jail was closed. And then they spent the entire day running in circles with people saying, "No, you can't see your client, call my supervisor." Our attorney would call that supervisor, he'd say, "Yeah, I know we can't, the jail's closed, call our supervisor." And just running around in circles. So it took hours and hours and hours. And of course, the bail amount, in violation of California law, as an attempt to intimidate and scare people of course, is one of the gross violations of our rights as well. And so now we're exploring our options into a class action lawsuit for all those who are arrested, because the mayor and the police in the city have to answer for this. And I don't know if any of you have been to City Hall since the raid. Can you raise your hand if you have been?
Yeah, I drive about there.
Okay, so for those of you who haven't seen it, which is most people in the room, City Hall now is completely surrounded by concrete barricades and a 10-foot high fence. The entire lawn. I mean, it's fortified because they don't want anyone to come back. And there is now a heavy police presence patrolling the entire perimeter. We had a press conference yesterday, right after we were released. It actually was on the cover of La Opinión, one of the largest Spanish language newspapers here. It was widely covered in other press as well. We had a press conference on the only area that's not barricaded, one of the entrances to City Hall. As soon as we got there to have the press conference, the police were on top of us saying, "You can't be here, you can't do this press conference." And we said, this is a public space, absolutely we can do this. And then they came back to give us a citation for using amplified sound, even though we had not. And they, the person who gave us a ticket said, "You were warned, you did it anyway," and none of that happened. And so they were still trying to use these tactics to get us out of there. But City Hall is barricaded, right? So it went from the people of LA occupying City Hall to the politicians and the police occupying City Hall, so no one can use it, right? But when they do that, when they fence off our City Hall, our public park, I mean, they're taking away our rights. That space exists for us. That space exists for us to protest if we see fit. It exists for us to go walk our dog at. I mean, it exists for us to do the things that we are allowed and afforded to under the Constitution. And by the city taking that away from us, they're taking away our rights. And we know that this crackdown wasn't just in LA, obviously, because LA was actually one of the few cities left standing, because dozens and dozens of cities had gone through a very similar thing, and in many cases, a lot worse. And this was not just kind of spontaneous mayors and police departments taking their own independent action, but this was nationally coordinated. And it was revealed actually through a gaffe by the Oakland mayor, Jean Quan, who's now infamous. She mistakenly admitted that prior to the Oakland raid, there was a conference call with over 40 mayors of different cities, actually convened by Mayor Villaraigosa to, or allegedly, because he's the president of the Mayor's Association, which was the one that convened the call, so it's likely that he had a role. But over 40 cities together put their heads together and said, how are we going to kick these people out? How are we going to crush this movement? And that's why we started seeing almost simultaneously, and actually simultaneously, raids taking place in dozens of cities. And the night that we were raided, Philadelphia was raided as well. And one of our comrades, a young 18-year-old named Walter, he was arrested as well and spent a lot of time in jail also. And so this is a nationally coordinated thing. And it's a nationally coordinated thing because the 1%, Wall Street, the billionaires, and their cronies that sit below them, their loyal servants in Washington, they know that this movement has the potential to really challenge the status quo, to really challenge their power, to really make real victories and real gains for normal people like us. And so they wanted to crush it with force, and not just crush it that day, but do it in a way so that no one ever wanted to come back and protest again. And that begs the question, right? And I think, there's all this question like, what's the next step? Like, what should we do? Like, what's the goal of the Occupy movement? And as we get closer to the elections, the Democratic Party is going to try to put their arm around the occupiers, say, yeah, we support you. And they're going to want people to think that elections and supporting the government, supporting politicians, supporting the process that we're told is the only way that we should try to win things in our favor. they're going to try to push us in that direction and say that, this is our government. You got to play by the things that are given to us. You take part in the elections. This is how change is made. But the nationwide crackdown on the Occupy movement just proves quite clearly who this government serves, right? If this was a government of, by, and for the people, or of, by, and for the 99%, or most of us, well then, would they deal with these occupations the same way? They wouldn't. Because if this was a government of, by, and for the people, of, by, and for the 99%, then first of all, they would say that our most cherished rights under the Constitution, the right to protest, the right to freedom of speech, the right to publicly assemble, that it is our mission as the government to make sure that these rights are protected for these people. And in fact, they did the opposite. And it's actually interesting because today, the UN envoy for human rights and freedom of speech is filing a formal complaint with the US government saying that the US government has violated all of these laws, which of course was the pretext to the bombing of Libya. So I doubt that the UN is going to be imposing any no-fly zones or anything over the US to protect the protesters. But if this was a government of, by, and for the 1%, they would be committed to protecting our rights and our right to protest, our right to peacefully assemble, our right to make our voices heard. And the other thing they would do, if this was a government of, by, and for the 99%, was listen to our grievances, was listen to our legitimate complaints and grievances that we have with this government, with this system. Skyrocketing unemployment, skyrocketing tuition, slashing of social services, an epidemic of foreclosures and evictions and homelessness. If they were a government representing us, then they would say, we should listen to what these people have to say. And they would take measures to meet our demands and make us not wanting to continue to fight. But instead, what did they do? Is they used every aspect of their power, every institution under their control, the police, the courts, to smash it with blood in a lot of ways. I mean, Scott Olson, the Iraq war veteran that was shot in the head, he has brain damage. He's never going to be the same. There's other people who have serious lasting injuries as well. And so it's very obvious who this government serves. It's a government of, by, and for the 1%. Because the only people benefiting from the Occupy movement being crushed is the 1%. And so we see that the government on the national level and on the city level is acting in those interests. And so the big question after LA's been raided and broken up, after so many other cities have dealt with this abuse and harassment and violence, the question is this going to go away? Like, what's going to happen to this movement now? So, is it going to go away because people got arrested, because people got evicted? Well, why did this movement start? Did all of those thousands of people take that action, go out into the streets because they wanted to go camping? Like, because they wanted to sleep in a park? Did they do all that because they wanted to get shot with rubber bullets? Because they wanted to get pepper sprayed and tear gassed? Because they wanted to watch their friends beaten in front of them? Is that why those people did that? Did they do it because they wanted to get arrested and go to jail? No. In fact, none of that stuff is fun. No one wanted to do that. They did that, the thousands of people did that and took that action because they feel that this system is not meeting their interests, that they are dispossessed, that they do not have a voice, and that all of the problems they are facing, they see no solution to them other than fighting, other than saying that we're tired of waiting, change isn't coming, things are just getting worse, we want things to change, so we're going to take action to try to change it. And that hasn't gone away. The reason and all of the economic issues, all of the things that pushed people into that movement, those are getting worse. And that desire to fight is just going to grow. And so the question of, is it going to go away? It can't go away. Because it's not up to the individual person thinking, should I continue this movement? It's about the conditions that they are living under. And the conditions are getting worse, and the conditions inevitably are going to make more and more people take the type of action that they have been, but it's going to change, and it's going to grow and develop, and we actually don't know what's next. There's an article actually today saying that maybe the next step some are saying that the next step for the Occupy movement isn't occupying public space, but occupying foreclosed homes and vacated buildings. I mean, this is a possible next step for the movement, and something that's growing in creativity and development, and we don't know what road it's going to take, but we know that the fundamental basis of people from all walks of life so frustrated with the status quo that they are willing to fight outside of the political establishment is something that is going to continue to develop, and we need to be there every step of the way to continue facilitating that development. And so that's really all I have in terms of this eyewitness account and some analysis of what's been going on. But I just wanted to close by saying that I think the experience that a lot of people got through the Occupy movement, in fact, there's many people in this room who have since joined the party once the Occupy movement started. I mean, even people who had been active for many, many years found it necessary to join an organization like ours once the Occupy movement started, because of course we can look at all of these different aspects of the Occupy movement, all of its deficiencies, all of its the great things about it. But one thing that we can see is that there are limitations in just a spontaneous uprising, which is what the Occupy movement was. I mean, it was just this spontaneous rebellion of people who were fed up, and there was a call to do something, and then people just spontaneously responded to it. And there was organization, but it was at a different type of level. And so the question is, if we really want to win, if we really want to be successful, how do we get more organized? And what does it mean to get more organized? And the answer to that is not simply being a part of a spontaneous movement and being someone who says, people are going out into the streets, I'm going to go out into the streets too, which is a heroic thing, and everyone who does that, it's an amazing action, an amazing step that people take. But what's next after that? We have to go beyond simply saying, I'm going to go to this demonstration, I'm going to go to this occupation, I'm going to go put my body on the line. But we have to get more organized. And that's why we have a party. And it's not to run political candidates, even though we do that, and it's great. But the reason that our party exists is because we know that there are going to be moments where we have opportunities to win, where we have opportunities for real victories, where we have opportunities for real gains. And then if we want to take advantage of those crucial moments and those crucial upsurges and be able to win those victories and wage those successful assaults, that we can't do it by just simply being a group of people spontaneously rising up against the system. That we need to be a part of that movement, but we need to meet all of the people who want to take that other step and be even more committed, who don't want to just go to the demonstration, but who want to be professional revolutionaries. And that's what this party is finding all of the people from all walks of life, from a variety of different struggles and movements, people who say, I want to make fighting against this system and fighting for a better world my highest priority. And that I want to enter into a group of other people who are on the same page, who understand that this is the most important task for humanity today, and form us into a fighting organization, into a weapon, where it can be members of an organization who are trained, who have become skilled in a variety of different things, who know how to act during demonstrations, who know how to plan demonstrations, who know how to deal with the police, who know how to fight the police when necessary, and have a real fighting force, literally like a military unit, of people who are prepared precisely for these moments when we can take advantage of political crises and economic crises to really wage these assaults on the 1%, which many of us have been doing for years. And so I think that's maybe the most important lesson to take out of the Occupy movement, is the lessons that people have learned being a part of that and seeing that we want to take that next step. We want to get more organized, because that's how we're going to win. It's through occupying, organizing, and rising up as a class against that 1%. And that's what we're going to continue to do, because we're not deterred at all by the arrest. We're going to keep moving forward. I think everyone in this room should be committed to moving forward with us.